All right, welcome back to Sailor's Disgrace. This episode, we will discuss many things regarding the Accountability Transparency Review report that recently came out from the Commandant, as well as updates to the program in general and updates to how I plan to this. There's actually some very interesting developments. But as always, I like to start with a quote. And this quote is from Josiah Stamp, and he said, "It is easy to dodge our responsibilities, but we cannot dodge the consequences of dodging our responsibilities." And that's how I feel all this is shaking out right now. And with this review of everything that happened with Fouled Anchor, the decades of lying and deceit and cover up of sexual assault and harassment issues within the Coast Guard, it's coming to reckoning. And it is time to put everyone uh, to account. And to start off, I'd like to discuss some of the highlights of the ATR that I read through it. It's a lengthy document. There's a lot to go through, and I'll put a post or a link to the entire report. But just some of the quick takeaways I found. So um, there's a lot in this report, and um, overall, it's a good report. And I've worked directly with the people that made this report and discussed some of the findings and ways forward. And they actually almost directly quoted me a few times in the report itself, which it's kind of surreal to read that, but and I'm sure it echoes a lot of what other people said too. It wasn't just me saying it. But just again, the quick highlights that I went through is that to start off, that there's going to be quarterly updates to the commandant and a one year progress brief that's going to be due in November of 2024. So this is going to be on the commandant's radar for at least the following year, which is good. It needs to be. So that's established in writing that they're going to follow up. They're doing tasking, and all that's going to be briefed to the commandant at the highest level for follow-on action. Two, there's training initiatives, and there's a whole slew of training gaps that they identified as far as why current leadership training does not include sexual assault training, or it's not given at the junior levels like it's given at the onset of your career, such as boot camp or the academy. But if you're a junior petty officer and you attend leadership and management school, it's really not much there, and that's really your target audience. So I'm about putting more of it there and discussing bystander intervention and all that stuff. So the other things that they talk about in the training initiatives are there's a senior executive implementation summit, which is going to be in February of 2024. It's going to have flag officers, senior civilians, SESs, as well as Gold Badge, the Master Chief Network. And interestingly enough, the ATR team reached out to me, and they actually want me to attend that seminar or that summit in Washington, D.C. as a survivor and share my story and my thoughts. I said yes, of course. I'm waiting for confirmation on orders and details on exact dates, but it looks like the first week of February. And I'll keep you guys posted on what's going to be said, what I can share, and how they take my input, because I'm going to be very blunt. I'm going to be very honest with what I have to say, as I think they need to hear it. That's why they're asking for it. So I think that's a great thing. There's also going to be more in-person training modules to the existing leadership courses, such as the Chief Petty Officer Association, PCO, XPO training, and that's going to be implemented in July of next year. There's also going to be more effective leadership courses. There's going to be a senior leader engagement through 2024 for the commanding officer conference cycle. So as the CEOs meet in the summer, they're going to have a focus on this as well. There's going to be more bystander intervention training that's going to be developed by 2025. Develop in-person SAPR training for all members. So they're going to go through and make sure every single member of the Coast Guard has this training, and not just click through general mandated training that we're used to, but actual constructive and worthwhile training by 2025. And then there's going to be a standalone SAPR training in GMT, which we all hate GMT because you have to go through it. But right now it's blended in with other stuff. But they're going to make it its own separate module, hopefully more interactive and a little more intuitive for the users. After the training, they talk about IPP, which is an Integrated Primary Prevention Program, which is going to be similar to what the DoD has already established. They're going to check our organizational structure. They're going to go through victim recovery, identify and evaluate options, have a victim mentor. So victims can actually mentor, not just a victim advocate, but someone that they can work with and even post adjudication. And then a SAPR strategic plan is going to be due by December 31st. Again, this is all just quick highlights that I've flipped through. So please read the report yourself, since there's a lot to go over. The next thing they talk about is accountability, developing policies and proposals to improve accountability. Um, and here's the highlight I got from that, and this is kind of the linchpin of the problem. And in this accountability section, it specifically says, directed actions will not include Operation Fouled Anchor personnel. They're still absolving anybody of any wrongdoing in the past. And that is ultimately the issue here, right? That we have all these decades worth of problems. We have the cover up by Admirals Uncumped and Schultz and all those people prior to Admiral Fagan taking office. And in this accountability review, it says nobody's going to be held accountable. Why? Why not? Why aren't we holding people to task? Why aren't we showing the Coast Guard and Congress and everybody else that what they did was wrong and that there's going to be consequences for what they did? And that's where we have this erosion of trust. We don't have faith in the system anymore. You know, it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. People screwed up. People did terrible things. People lied about it, but we're just going to move on with our lives and not worry about it. So until we fix that issue, none of this really matters, in my opinion. Like, it's great that we're doing all this stuff, that we have more training, and we're going to not tolerate any sexual assault and discrimination. And, you know, we said that for years. We've said that for decades. But we obviously have. And we've obviously been more concerned about saving face and personal promotions and advancements and career decisions rather than the well-being of our shipmates. And it shows by this one statement. So out of this 100-something page document, there's about 2 sentences that say that they will not include Operation Fouled Anchor personnel in any accountability. So it just negates everything. It negates everything. And I'll bring that up. I'm going to bring that up when I see them, when I talk to them, hopefully in February, as long as I get orders and funding is there. If not, it is what it is. So we'll keep going with the report. So some of the good stuff is they start enhancing the rights of the victims. There's going to be more policy for safe to report to address minor misconduct if it is associated with assault. So like if there's underage drinking or something, some other policy that someone broke, you know, same thing with cadets saying they're not supposed to go out on weekends or with certain people and upperclassmen, and that stuff can be waived. You know, it could be like, okay, we get it, you broke a minor violation, however you were assaulted by someone, so we're going to not worry about the minor violations, because that's too often the case. That's a barrier to reporting, and it's actually happened where people are held accountable for the wrong things. The victims held accountable for drinking underage when they were assaulted. Like, who gives a shit, you know? So, and then they're also going to develop policy to allow the victim the right to be heard in these instances. So a lot of times they didn't have a voice. It was just a decision made by a commanding officer or supervisor. Not anymore. Now the victims actually have a right to be heard. So hopefully that's going to be developed. Specifically, moving on at the academy, there's some changes coming down. The superintendent will now report directly to the vice commandant, as before they reported to, I forget which office it was, but it wasn't to the second in command. So now that's who they're going to report to for any issues. There's going to be a lot of revision to SWAB summer as far as supervision of cadets, because I know upperclassmen usually run, so the first class cadets that are seniors essentially run the junior brand new boot swabs as they come through the academy. And there's obviously problems with that. You know, a bunch of 20-year-olds supervising a bunch of 18-year-olds, and things get out of line pretty quick. So there's going to be some instruction on that. There's also going to be revisions to the cadet conduct system. And one of the things I saw is that they're going to put locks on all the barracks rooms over at Chase Hall in the academy. So the fact that that wasn't a thing before kind of shocks me. Why didn't personal rooms have locks? Yeah, let's move on from that. That shouldn't even be in the report. That should have been done decades ago. Jesus. But also at the Academy, they make resources and info available through our resource hub. I'm sorry, that's not with the Academy, it's for the Coast Guard, which includes cases and case review. I'm not sure how specific they'll get, but hopefully it's more than just say, hey, a person was masted and lost rank. Like, okay, well, what happened with this case? Why? What did they do? Because right now it's very anonymous, it's very ambiguous. You really don't know, and the rumor mill starts, and you start talking to people, and oh, it's so and so did this, and let's remove all that. Let's be blunt and say, hey, Chief so and so groped a female petty officer and was reduced in rank. Okay, let's actually put it out there. So hopefully that's some of the resources that they're going to put out there. Let's see. There's also a good infograph about leadership and faith in leadership eroding. I'm going to put that up on here so you guys can see it while I'm talking, but also refer to it. It's actually pretty interesting about how faith in leadership is done through DEOC surveys throughout the Coast Guard has dwindled over the past several years, especially relating to this issue. People don't trust their commands. People don't trust the Coast Guard to take care of them. They don't trust that if they want something to remain private, that it will remain private. There's a whole slew of issues, and you can see why. You can definitely see why. Furthermore, training is sparse on Sapper. Many people don't get it unless they take a command position. That's very true. I'd always heard this stuff, and even as a chief, I think I talked about it in a previous episode where we had training after training after training. You really don't get the nuts and bolts of it until you become a senior leader in the Coast Guard, and that's not good. Everyone should understand how the system works, so if they get into the system, it's not overwhelming, and it's unfortunate as a survivor. Going through the system is terrifying, but to be on the other side of that, so if you're a supervisor and you have to help someone through it, or if you become a VA, or if you're just a confidant, understanding how the program works is critical. So more training on the junior enlisted side with that, especially. One of the things they mentioned too is it's more specific for training and advancement. On the service-wide exams, we have what's known as EPME section, which is performance, military education, and it's kind of general Coast Guard and military knowledge that we get tested on. Right now, there are absolutely zero testing questions or modules until you test for Chief, for E7. So it's not even required to study this stuff until you're sitting for a Chief, which, again, they should start implementing this at E4, E5, E6. So I think that would be a good change as well. Here's something that kind of jumped out at me regarding recovery of victims. And it's pretty much what I said, word for word, but it's more attention is going to be based on recovery and not just adjudication. So it seems like right now the way cases are handled, and there's the prosecutor's investigation and potential prosecution and resolution of that. So either it's brought to court-martial, or it's brought to mast, or administrative, or nothing happens, like in my case. And once that happens, it's kind of over. There's no follow-on with the survivor at that point. They're just left to their own devices. And I mentioned that. It's like, hey, the Coast Guard really didn't care after my case was done. It's basically like, all right, you got this. Sorry, hopefully you do well. And I was in a position where I was a warrant officer. I was kind of senior in the program, so I could figure my way out. But I can't imagine that E3 or E4 just, all right, well, get back to work. Hopefully you do okay. No wonder most of those people get out of the Coast Guard, turn to drugs and alcohol, commit suicide. They're left on their own, really, and that's terrible. So more focus on returning that person to whole, making sure that person is a functioning member of the Coast Guard or society if they decide to get out, and making sure that their rights and benefits are included in that, and they understand that. Because right now it's not set up that way, and that's just sad. So kind of moving it back a little bit, and this report seems to jump all over the place, so this is how I made my notes. But when we're talking about adjudication, there's some interesting statistics here on page 26 of the report. I'm going to pull it up real quick and read it. So in fiscal year 2021, of the 113 sexual harassment cases, 61 were substantiated, 23 unsubstantiated, and 29 cases remained open. And the same year, 79 sexual assault cases open in that year were closed. Just one, resulted in court-martial, 13 in non-judicial punishment, 19 in administrative action, and 46 in no action taken. All right. So, and also in 2021, 108 cases open in prior years were closed. 13 resulted in court martials. This is previous to 2021. And 13 in non-judicial punishment, 19 in administrative action, and 46 in no action taken. So the large majority of cases, there's no action taken whatsoever. Why? I understand not all cases can be substantiated. There may not be enough evidence to convict or go to trial. That is understandable. But no action taken whatsoever, that's why do you think people aren't reporting? Why do you think people are scared? Why do you think perpetrators feel like they can get away with this stuff? Because they do frequently, even with all this program in place and all these things. We've had this culture in the Coast Guard for so long. It's completely infiltrated every aspect of how we handle these cases and how people treat each other. And I don't know what else to say about that. We need to publish this information. We need to make sure people are aware that we really aren't tolerating it, and that there are protections in place for victims and survivors. Because right now it's not that way, and the data shows it. This is just the most recent data, and these are just cases that they know of. How many cases do we not know about? I'm sure the numbers are much, much higher than we can anticipate. So, moving on from that, there's a lot more back on recovery. Like I said, this document kind of bounces back and forth, but if we go to page 59, there's some good information on recovery for victims and victim support. So here's one thing I kind of highlighted from that is recovery from sexual assault is not a linear process. I've said that many times in my own surviving, my own healing, and I've shared that with others too. Shortly after an assault, victims often need to be seen by trauma-informed and empathetic providers. In the long term, victims experience a dynamic recovery. Negative reactions by friends, family, mental health professionals, or their command, whether intentional or unintentional, can cause someone to withdraw. Triggers can come back, causing someone to need help again. Case mishandling can lead to secondary victimization. Very true. The research on the effect of sexual assault on military members demonstrates that it can take years or a lifetime to work through the physical, mental, and emotional trauma. The current system places the burden of the victim to navigate the recovery process. This includes handling both the personal and professional ramifications. The Coast Guard needs to shift the burden away from victims by offering empathetic support to victims' recovery from trauma. The service can accomplish this by providing victims adequate options and services to allow agency in decision-making to reach recovery, whether they choose to stay in or opt out of the service. And that says a lot right there. I think if we take that to heart, talking about the whole person and bringing them back to where they were, or maybe not where they were, but making sure that they're okay, that they're able to survive and able to live their lives, whether they're in the Coast Guard or out of the Coast Guard, is huge. And we need to put our money where our mouth is on that one. I'll leave it at that. And please comment more if you guys have any thoughts on that. So part of that ongoing recovery is we don't have a lot of data on that. So we currently don't have tracking in the Coast Guard of how many people get out after a sexual assault case. We just don't keep that data for God knows why. DOD does, but Coast Guard, we just don't. It's like we don't care. Crazy, right? So they're talking about implementing follow-on questionnaires of survivors, which can be re-traumatizing, right? But it's also, I think it's a good check. It's 5 years from now, hey, we know your case has been resolved. Whatever happened. How are you doing right now? What's your status? What's your health like? What do you need? How can we help you? And how can we help others? Keeping it open like that, keeping those lines of communication open. And I get some people may not want to respond. That's fine. Some people may feel threatened by that or re-traumatized, re-triggered. That's also fine. But there must be a way to maintain communication, check in on these people, and to ensure that they know that the Coast Guard cares. So there's also some more on continuing care options for ashore. So like if you're underway, you're on a cutter, and you really need ongoing care, maybe transfer you to a shore unit, and um, hooking you up with a civilian, military civilian or military active duty provider for your health care, so for mental health, which would help. So someone that's staying in the Coast Guard or staying in the military, we often change duty stations and we go from state to state, even out of the country. And as I've learned, I've had therapists in different states. And I brought this up with the review team. It's like, hey, I've had therapists in Texas and Florida. Now I'm in California. I've had to change every single time, and I've developed relationships with those therapists. And luckily, most of them have been really good. There's one or two I ditched, but have been really good. But it sucks that once I really build a relationship after 2 or 3 years, I have to start again. I have to retell all my story. I have to start with because the way the laws are by state to state, I can't even do telehealth with my old provider in Florida because Florida doesn't allow that. So a way around that would be to use military providers. They can kind of go around the globe, and you can do FaceTime or Skype calls with those providers, which is better than nothing. I personally like face-to-face interaction, but it's if you're able to maintain a relationship with someone and it's over Zoom, that's great. It's a good option to have because it is difficult to relive your traumas again and again. And not just to do that, but it's tiring. It's tiring to, okay, got this new therapist and I'm going to have to open up this can of worms again. Kind of feel like I'm stepping backwards or wasting time. Might take me 4 or 5 sessions to get it all out, and then we're back on track, and it's just, it's hard to accept that as your recovery. It's like, all right, well, if I'm going to stay in the military, I'm going to have to deal with the fact that I have to restart my healing every time I move. And that's a very difficult reality for survivors. So hopefully they can implement that, Last note that I had on this report was after an academy cadet is discharged, so if they're assaulted and they no longer want to be with the Coast Guard or at the academy, that's fine. I think that's great. They'd have an option to go to a civilian college and then gain commission after graduation. So if someone's assaulted by a fellow cadet or a staff member, which happens, and they say, you know what, I love the Coast Guard. I want to be in the Coast Guard, but I can't do this academy life anymore. I can't stay in this barracks where I was assaulted or on this base. Fine, put them in a local college, and we have programs like that. And we have C-SPY where we have civilian college options for people, and essentially they go to college on a Coast Guard dime, and when they graduate college after 4 years, they go to basically OCS or direct commission program, which is like 17 weeks, or I think there's even a 5-week program, however many weeks it is, and then they're commissioned. So that is hopefully that can be an option. They discussed that in the report. Like, hey, give these survivors an outlet to still serve if they really want to. And I think that's awesome. So that's kind of it on the ATR itself. So again, it is lengthy. There's a lot of information to digest. Some of it's kind of word soup, word salad, what are you going to call it? And it doesn't really provide definitive answers. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of what ifs and how can we do things better. And there are some good recommendations on more training and more options for survivors. I think that's fantastic. But the first word of ATR, accountability, is not there. It's missing. There's some transparency. There's some review. But where's the accountability? Where are we holding anybody accountable for what's been done and how this was handled? And the fact that this is only blown up because it was put out on the news is damning. To anybody really following this within the Coast Guard, it's troubling to know that, okay, yes, these issues have been happening for decades. We tried to bury it. We tried really hard, all the way up at the commandant level, before Admiral Fagan. Really tried to bury this thing. It got out, and now we have to deal with it. But we're not really we're gonna talk about what happened, but we're just gonna move on and say, okay, yeah, we get it. Things are bad. Let's not tolerate anymore. We're not gonna tolerate. But we do tolerate by letting these people off the hook. until something happens there, and maybe there will be accountability with the recent congressional hearings. So I posted recently uh, that several Coast Guard members retired, and even a cadet from current cadet at the academy spoke to a congressional hearing, and I highly recommend listening to the entire hearing. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours long, but it is compelling and it is disturbing, and it echoes everything that I've said on this podcast. And it's funny how life works out. I started this podcast earlier this year in 2023, and just as I finished telling my story is when Fouled Anchor came out, and it was very eye-opening, and it was not comforting to know that these things were being addressed or um, seen at different levels, but it really shed a light on why this happened to me and others, and why it continued, how it was handled, why I felt the way I felt even 20 years ago, and even in 2016. I didn't feel safe making this report. Um, it made sense. It made perfect sense that there was a systemic issue here, and I knew it through the rumor mill, and I knew it just from personal experience. But to see it broadcast like it was, and to see how the Coast Guard really screwed the pooch on this, and it was sad. Ultimately it's sad. But going back to the congressional hearing, and I reached out to one of the members on the hearing, and hopefully I can get a response back, but I think everything they said is valid. Some of them are doctors now, and some are lawyers, and one's a cadet, and one's a mom and family. Like, it's just a whole mix of people. There's one that attended the academies in the 70s. She was the second class to ever have females, and it was eye-opening to hear their accounts, and also to hear their solutions to this issue. And they're talking to senators, and it was actually kind of funny to hear the senators talk, both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, and they both agreed to everything they said, and they kept laughing about it. It's like, this is full-on bipartisan support for the Coast Guard and the military and everything that's happened here, and your testimony was some of the best testimony we've ever heard. And so that was heartwarming to hear that in a strange way, but that they promise that they're going to take action on this. And Lieutenant McCafferty, retired, she actually talked about holding people accountable. That's been her big issue with this, is that she worked directly with the Commandant's office prior to retiring. And she talked about how there were gatekeepers that, kept information from the top levels so they wouldn't have to worry about their promotions. So these commanders and captains and one-star admirals and stuff would purposely hide information from the Commandant, from the Vice Commandant. Don't give them the bad news, because if they have bad news, that means that things are bad. And if they're bad on our watch, that means that we're not going to get promoted. And that's very true. And it's stuff that I've heard my entire career, even as a kid, from when my dad was in the service. He talked about that stuff. Officers look out for their own. And that was, my dad was in from the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. This is nothing new. And what she talked about is holding those admirals accountable, and those captains. And specifically, they would talk about Captain Samasi at the academy, and the prior commandants, reactivate them. Admiral Fagan has the authority to reactivate anybody. Reactivate them, put them on trial, hold them accountable, see what shakes out. Make them answer for their poor decisions and their cover-ups. And senators at one point said, yeah, you read our minds. Don't worry, we are going to talk to these people and others. That I'm very curious to hear. If there's a hearing or committee that puts them live on stage, so to speak, I will definitely tune in, and I'll try to get some front row seats, because I want to hear it, and I want to see if I can look them eye to eye, and ask them, what were you thinking? Why were you doing this? How pervasive was this? What was the purpose behind this? it'd be very interesting to hear and to see what kind of accountability. And sadly, I think the Coast Guard won't be the ones to hold them accountable. I think it might have to be Congress, and we'll see what they do. I'm not sure what actions they can take. I'm not sure if it's just a public shaming, if it's just damaging to their future careers. But guess what? Their retirement, their pension is set. They're making more money than I am on active duty in their retirement, and they'll do that for the rest of their lives. And I don't wish them harm or really ill will or anything like that. But what negative repercussions do they have? They might lose a position on a board or a head of some foundation. So what? They can still enjoy their pensions and all the money they save and the properties that they have, I'm sure, and live just fine. They can do whatever they want. And that's just the sad reality of it. What do they have to lose at this point? Nothing. Nothing. Except for their legacy. And maybe that's what we need to take away from them is their illustrious and sterling career. It's to shine a light on it. I'm sure they all did great things, and they were dedicated professionals in a lot of ways. But if they're covering up stuff like this, I guarantee there's more. There's a reason behind it, and it's wrong. It's just wrong to know that we were lied to for so long, and we really weren't taken care of and respected, and that these people are not being held accountable even still with this report. I don't know what else to say about that. So hopefully more to come, right? Speaking of more things to come, backtracking to kind of my personal life, I've been involved in this with the ATR, and I'll say the people that put this together are very passionate individuals, and they're also at a crossroads. They have all this data, all this information they collected over the past 3 months, and they're at the same place I am. It's like, okay, well, where do we go from here? And I spoke with them on the phone. I've had conferences and emails, and like I said, they want me to attend in February for the executive summary in Washington, D.C., which is awesome. And they actually want me to go to Yorktown, Virginia in March to put together training. They want to use my story kind of as one of the faces of the Coast Guard and future sapper training. Actually have me speak, record my story, and basically I'll be the guy, and maybe some others, I'm not sure, but they want to use my story as an example. So you might see me in some general mandated training before too long, which is surreal. I never thought I'd be that person. Definitely not 20 years ago when this happened to me. Definitely not when I made my report. Definitely not when I started my therapy and recovery and healing. Even into the past couple months, when I started this podcast, I'd never thought of that. I never thought that this would happen, but it has, and it's grown. It's grown from not just from this podcast, but just naturally from the way life works. All the events swirling into place and putting me on a path and putting everyone else on this path too. I think it's really humbling, and it's amazing to be a part of something that's bigger than myself. And I appreciate everyone out there that's been a part of this, that supported me and my family, and that continues to support the efforts of this program and supports the Coast Guard. And I think that's something that when you listen to, going back to the congressional hearing, every one of those members that was speaking, the retirees, the current cadet, they all said the same thing. They love the Coast Guard. They love what it's capable of. They love being a part of something greater than themselves. They love the missions. They love the job. They're very proud of their service and the service members. And there are great people in this organization. There are fantastic people in this organization. But there's the but. There's all these. There's this dark underbelly. There's this deceit and lies and cover up that taint the entire thing, and it needs to be eradicated. It needs to be held to account. So that's, I think, where I'm going to leave this. it's a lot in this episode, a lot that we discussed, or I discussed, and I really want to hear your guys' input. Please send me some questions, post some comments. I can't do this without you guys and your support, and I'll keep you up to date on how everything else goes, how the accountability section for the ATR, the continuing issues with my training, and how I plan on moving forward with this as well. So again, thanks everybody. Thanks again to David Brown for your theme music. As always, it's great. I love it. And it really helps set the tone for everything. Check them out, blues.com. And that's all I have for this one, guys. So again, appreciate it, and take care of yourselves.